In the autumn of 1892, when dreams traveled by train and hope came wrapped in envelopes, there lived a young woman named Rose McKenna in a small town outside Boston. Rose had been born with a withered left arm, shorter than the right, with fingers that curved inward like a delicate bird's wing. But what she lacked in one limb, she made up for in spirit that burned brighter than the gas lamps lining her street. Rose worked as a typist at the local newspaper, her good hand flying across the keys faster than most people could write with two. She taught herself to thread needles, button coats, and braid her auburn hair with a grace that made people forget what they'd noticed at first glance. But Rose never forgot. She carried the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room. When the loneliness grew too heavy, Rose did something that surprised even herself. She answered a matrimonial advertisement in the paper she typed for daily. Prosperous rancher seeks devoted wife for life in Colorado Territory. Character more important than beauty. Write to Thomas Whitmore, care of Denver Post Office. Rose spent 3 evenings crafting her letter, her good hand steady as she wrote about her love of books, her skill with numbers, her dream of seeing mountains. She mentioned her work, her character, her faith. She did not mention her arm. Some truths, she told herself, were better shared in person. Thomas Whitmore's replies came weekly, filled with descriptions of his ranch, his cattle, the way sunrise painted the Rockies gold. He wrote about wanting a partner, not just a wife, someone to share both the work and the wonder of frontier life. His letters were kind, thoughtful, and Rose found herself falling in love with the man behind the careful handwriting. After 3 months of correspondence, Thomas sent train fare and a proposal. Rose sold her few belongings, kissed her elderly aunt goodbye, and boarded the westbound train with her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird finally set free. The train pulled into Denver Station on a crisp October morning, steam hissing into the thin mountain air. Rose stepped onto the platform in her best traveling dress, her left arm hidden beneath a carefully draped shawl. She clutched Thomas's photograph in her good hand, scanning the crowd for his familiar features. She spotted him immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident stride that parted crowds. Thomas Whitmore looked exactly like his photograph, perhaps more handsome in person. Rose's heart leaped as she waved, calling his name. Thomas approached, his smile warm and genuine. "Miss McKenna, I presume? The journey wasn't too difficult, I hope?" "Not at all," Rose replied, suddenly nervous. "The mountains are even more beautiful than you described." They talked easily as Thomas loaded her trunk into his wagon. He was charming, attentive, asking about her journey and commenting on the weather. But as they reached his ranch, a sprawling property that spoke of considerable wealth, Rose noticed his demeanor beginning to shift. That evening, over dinner in his impressive dining room, Rose finally let her shawl slip. She reached for her water glass, and her withered arm became visible. Thomas's eyes fixed on it immediately, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. The conversation died. The comfortable warmth that had been building between them froze like water in a mountain stream. Later, as Rose unpacked in the guest room where Thomas had suddenly insisted she stay, he knocked on her door. When she opened it, his face was composed but distant. "Miss McKenna," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. In your letters, you failed to mention your condition." Rose's cheeks burned. "I didn't think it mattered. You said character was more important than—" "I said character was more important than beauty," Thomas interrupted. "I said nothing about deformity. I have a reputation in this territory. I need a wife who can represent my holdings properly. I'm sorry, but this arrangement won't work." The words hit Rose like a physical blow. She nodded quietly, her throat too tight for speech. "I'll pay for your return ticket." Thomas continued. "You can stay the night, but I'll need you on tomorrow's train." Rose barely slept. She sat by the window, watching the stars over the mountains Thomas had described so lovingly in his letters, wondering how beauty could feel so cold. The next morning, Thomas drove her to town in silence. He left her at the small hotel near the train station with enough money for a return ticket and a few days' lodging. His goodbye was curt, formal, final. Rose sat in the hotel lobby, staring at the train ticket. She had no job to return to, no home except her aunt's cramped apartment. But she couldn't bring herself to board that eastbound train. Not yet. Instead, she walked through the small mountain town, her trunk in tow. She found work at the local telegraph office. Her typing skills were desperately needed, and the operator didn't care about her arm as long as she could work the keys. She rented a tiny ring above the bakery and began once again to build a life from nothing. Days turned to weeks. Rose threw herself into her work, becoming the fastest telegraph operator the Mountain Territory had ever seen. She helped miners send messages to distant families, assisted business owners with correspondence, and slowly began to feel useful again. It was on a busy Tuesday morning, as she worked through a stack of urgent messages, that she first encountered James Hartford. He burst through the telegraph office door like a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders, his expensive suit dusty from travel, his dark hair disheveled. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled telegram. "I need to send an urgent message to New York," he said, his voice strained. "My business partner, there's been an accident. I need the fastest operator you have." Rose looked up from her keys. "That would be me, sir." "What's the message?" James Hartford, for she learned his name as he dictated the telegram, was unlike any man she'd ever encountered. He spoke rapidly but clearly, his message full of complex financial terms and urgent instructions. As Rose's fingers flew across the keys, he watched with growing amazement. "Remarkable," he murmured. "I've never seen anyone work so quickly." When she finished, he studied her with intense brown eyes. "You're not from here, are you, Miss McKenna?" "Rose McKenna. And no, I'm from Boston originally." "What brought you to our humble mountain town?" Rose hesitated, then decided on honesty. "A failed engagement, you might say." James nodded knowingly. "Ah, well, his loss. Clearly, your skill is extraordinary." Over the following weeks, James became a regular customer. His business dealings required constant communication with associates across the country, and he insisted on using only Rose's services. She learned that he was a mining investor, a man who'd built a fortune by seeing potential where others saw only rock and dirt. Their conversations grew longer, extending beyond business to books, travel, dreams. James had traveled the world. But he spoke of the mountains with a reverence that reminded Rose of Thomas's letters. The difference was that James seemed to see beauty in everything, including, apparently, her. He never stared at her arm, never asked uncomfortable questions. When she struggled with packages or doors, he helped naturally, without fuss or pity. When she mentioned her love of reading, he brought her books from his personal library. When she admired the mountain wildflowers, he appeared the next day with a bouquet. "Mr. Hartford," Rose said one afternoon as he delivered another stack of telegrams, "people will talk if you keep bringing me gifts." James smiled, that warm expression that had become the highlight of her days. "Let them talk, Miss McKenna. I've never much cared for gossip. But surely a man of your position—" "My position," James interrupted gently, "is that of a man who's found the most intelligent, capable, and beautiful woman in the territory. If society has a problem with that, society can adjust." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Hartford, you don't have to." "James," he corrected, "and I don't have to do anything. I want to. There's a difference." Their courtship was gentle, respectful, and utterly different from the desperate correspondence that had brought Rose west. James courted her mind first, engaging her in discussions about literature, current events, and business. He valued her opinions, sought her advice, and treated her as an equal partner in conversation. When he finally asked permission to court her formally, Rose felt compelled to address the obvious. "James," she said quietly, "surely you've noticed that I'm different." He looked at her steadily. "I've noticed that you are remarkable. I've noticed that you work harder than anyone I know, that you're kinder than most people deserve, and that you light up every room you enter. Is there something else I should be noticing?" Rose gestured to her arm. Most men, I am not most men," James said firmly. "And if you think something so trivial could change how I feel about you, then you don't know me at all." Their engagement was announced in the local paper, causing quite a stir. James Hartford, one of the territory's wealthiest men, marrying a telegraph operator with a disability? The gossips had a field day. Rose heard the whispers, of course. She saw the stares when they walked together through town. But James seemed genuinely oblivious to it all. proud to have her on his arm, introducing her to everyone as my brilliant fiancée. The wedding took place on a hilltop overlooking the valley, with the Rocky Mountains standing as silent witnesses. Rose wore a dress of ivory silk that James had commissioned from Denver's finest dressmaker, designed specifically to accommodate her arm while making her feel beautiful. As they exchanged vows, James spoke words that Rose would treasure forever. "I promise to love, not just who you are, but who you're becoming. I promise to see your strength where others see weakness, your beauty where others see flaws. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our dreams." When Rose spoke her vows, her voice was clear and strong. "I promise to match your faith in me with faith in myself. I promise to see the wonder in every day we share. I promise to love you, not for what you've given me, but for who you are, the man who sees miracles where others see only mountains." Their first year of marriage was everything Rose had dreamed of and more. James's wealth afforded them a beautiful home, travel opportunities, and the chance to help others. But more than that, his love gave Rose something she'd never had: complete acceptance. He never tried to hide her arm or make excuses for it. When they attended social functions, he introduced her proudly, and his confidence seemed to rub off on everyone around them. People who might have stared began to see what James saw: a remarkable woman whose spirit far outshone any physical difference. Rose established a school for children with disabilities, using James's resources and her own experience to create a place where differences were celebrated rather than hidden. James supported every endeavor, often saying that marrying Rose was the best business decision he'd ever made. She'd taught him that the greatest investments were in people, not properties. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, James took Rose's hand, her left hand, the one that was different. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "what would have happened if you'd married that rancher instead of coming to work at the telegraph office?" Rose considered this. "I think I would have spent my life trying to be someone I'm not, instead of becoming who I was meant to be." "And who were you meant to be?" Rose smiled, squeezing his hand with her strong fingers. "Exactly who I am right now. A woman who learned that love isn't about finding someone who overlooks your flaws, it's about finding someone who sees your flaws as part of your perfection." James lifted her hand to his lips, kissing each finger gently. "Then we're both exactly where we belong." As the stars emerged over the Rocky Mountains, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd come west seeking acceptance and found something far more valuable: a love that didn't just tolerate her differences but celebrated them. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in our deepest fears. Sometimes the love we think we're not worthy of is exactly the love we need to help us see our own worth. And sometimes, when the world says you're not enough, you just need to find the person who says you're everything. Rose McKenna Hartford had found that person, and in doing so, she'd found herself.